Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Palmy and this is where I share my DAZSTUDIO learnings with you and where I also share my learnings with my graphic novels that I'm creating with DAZSTUDIO and other software as well. In today's video, we're going to be doing something a little bit different, which is focusing on this graphic novel here, Tiger Dragon Rebirth. This is the one that I created all the way back in 2021. And this is where I'm going to be sharing with you the creator's commentary for chapter 1 of Tiger Dragon the Rebirth. Now, there are actually 9 chapters in this story, so there are 9 videos in this creator's commentary. What is the creator's commentary? The creator's commentary is where I share with you my learning. So as I'm creating this story, Tiger Dragon the Rebirth, I'm learning, I'm reading books, I'm learning from other creators, and I'm adding this into the story as I'm creating this. So we're going to be learning about hooks. We're going to be learning about establishing shots. We're going to learn about opening sequences. We're going to be learning a lot of things in terms of page turns as well. So all these things that I'm learning, I'm putting it into my story to engage my reader. I want my reader to go through the whole book and not put it down. I want them to be excited as they're going through the story. I want them to keep turning the page. And I want them to feel like they've been on this incredible journey with this character. That's what I'm trying to do with my story here, Tiger Dragon the Rebirth. This creator's commentary was actually supposed to be a reward for the aforementioned Kickstarter campaign, which was created in February 2024. So the Kickstarter campaign in February 2024, which bombed. So that's why I'm sharing it with you here, because I feel like there's some amazing insights in this that are going to help you as a creator. If you're trying to create a comic book, you're trying to create a visual narrative, this is going to help you. It's going to give you some sort of learning. So you're going to learn something, you're going to take it away, you're going to apply it to your story. It's going to make your story even better. So without further ado, let's get into the creator's commentary for chapter 1 of Tiger Dragon the Rebirth. So here we are with chapter 1. Let's go into the creator's commentary. Let's dive in deeper. Let's give you some insights, some behind the scenes on how I created this awesome story. So the first panel here in chapter 1 is the establishing shot. Now there are many ways to create an establishing shot. There are multiple ways. If you have a look at multiple comics, there's many ways to do this. I went with tried and tested method because I just started my journey to create this and I wanted to just keep it simple. Nothing fantastical, just keeping it simple so we know where we are in the story. This establishing shot is used in every type of programming, whether it's a TV program or a movie. You will see some sort of establishing shot letting you know that, oh, we're in this building or we're in this place or wherever we are. It's just a way of showing the reader, or you as the reader, right, where is this story taking place? Where are we in this particular part of the world? What's going on? And that's what it's all about. So after the establishing shot, we move on to the main hook, as we call it. So the hook is basically where there's some sort of action to get the reader intrigued into what's happening. So it's very important to have some sort of action or some sort of question, some sort of open loop where you are asking a question or you're showing something that's very interesting. This happens in movies all the time and TV programs. You'll see something happen the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes. There's something happening, a hook, to get you enticed, and then they go and shoot off into the intro of the actual TV program where they have the title screens, etc., and the music hits and everything. So that's what we're trying to do here with this kind of like panel here, give you the action so you're kind of intrigued and seeing what's happening. And not only that, we get to learn a bit more about the characters. So we get to learn about this character here, she's speaking in Japanese, and we learn about this character here who doesn't understand Japanese. And that's what I wanted to do, was create this contrast of characters. Very important. Not every character should be the same, so every character should be slightly different to create that contrast. And we also get to see their everyday activities, right? So what happens in a normal day of our characters? Well, in a normal day of these two characters is they wake up and they train every morning. Now, they may not train exactly the same way, but they train every morning. So we know that from their lives that this is what they do every morning. They wake up, they're training the skills, and they're kind of like sparring with each other. So that's what we learn here in this. Something to think about when you're creating your own comic is get that hook in, get that action in, get the reader interested, and then move the story from there. So as we turn the page here, we see the characters here struggling, and then we see this panel here, which is very unusual because you've got like a 3D kind of like 3D artwork, but you've got like 2D animation going on here with the speed lines. And that's something you can consider doing. So don't be afraid to mix 2D artwork with 3D artwork or 3D art with 2D artwork or vice versa. It really doesn't matter. What matters is you take the best elements of what comics have to offer and you implement them into your story. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You're actually adding to the whole experience for the reader. So we have the thwomp sound here. We have the speed lines here, giving that energy to that very small panel, showing you the kind of like impact of that panel. So that's very important to get the best elements of what comics have to offer, put them into your story, and just to enhance your story. That's absolutely fine. Nothing wrong with that. And then we have this character here, Gran here. This character here, Gran, was actually not in the original script. She was actually created in the second or third draft of the script. And the reason why Gran was created is because in every story, in every superhero story, or in every story, there's always a character known as the guide. Now, I learned this from The Hero's Journey, from Joseph Campbell, from The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Great book, by the way. Highly recommend you read that. It's a very dense book, but definitely you can learn a lot in terms of The Hero's Journey. And every hero basically has a guide that helps them on their journey. So if you have a look at some of the best stories ever created, like Star Wars, Luke Skywalker has Yoda and Ben Kenobi as his guides. Batman, Bruce Wayne, has Alfred and Commissioner Gordon as his guides, right? They are there to help him. And then obviously you've got my favorite, Spider-Man, Peter Parker. His guides are Uncle Ben and Aunt May. And there are many, many others who help him as well along the way. But those are the two main ones, right? They're the two main characters that actually guide him in terms of who he becomes and really push him to be that scientist even though he's getting bullied at school. It's very important you have that character, the guide, and this is why I created Gran, because she is the guide, right? She is like 80 years old. She's got that vast life experience and she's going to be able to help our protagonist here, Ayame, on her journey. That's why I created Gran. So consider that. Consider having a guide in your story. Very, very important. The hero's journey, a journey we're all on, by the way. We all see ourselves as the hero of our journey in our lives, whether you believe it or not. And we need guides, right? So guides could be mentors in real life. So obviously I've got many mentors, so have you. You've got mentors as well, people who are helping you, people you follow on social media. They're your mentors, right? You're trying to learn from them. So that's why it's all about there. So the guide, very important character to have in your story. So on this page, we have a ritual here that Gran, Tatsu and Ayame are in the process of doing. Now this ritual was taken from my personal experience. This is a ritual that we do every year annually. And this ritual is basically thanking our ancestors, right? Being grateful for our ancestors, for them, for what they went through. And that's what I wanted to put into this story here. So that's something from my personal experience. So with this ritual, my oldest uncle will speak the passage, so to speak, in his native tongue, which is Punjabi. So in this part of the story, I had Gran do the same kind of ritual, but do it in her native tongue, which is Japanese. So we have that there. Another part of the ritual is we are not allowed to eat until our ancestors have eaten. So we kind of like metaphorically give the food to them. And then once they've eaten the food, once we've given them that, then we're allowed to eat the food. So that's something I wanted to put in the story as well, which we see here. So you see Tatsu here going for the dango dumplings, and then Ayame stops him from eating it. Again, showing that contrast, right? Ayame is older, she knows a bit more, and then we have Tatsu here who's more like childlike innocence, so to speak, where he's just kind of doing whatever he wants to do. But we've got Ayame to hold him control, as that would happen with siblings, right? The older sibling, a bit more responsible, younger sibling, bit more loose, right? Not as much responsibility, basically gets away with a lot. Something everybody can relate to. So don't be afraid to put your personal life experience into these stories. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. As long as it enhances the story, makes it better, right? Absolutely nothing wrong with that. You're actually adding more into the story, and that's going to resonate with people more, right? It's going to resonate with people more because it's actual life experience. And that's what people want from stories. They want to read stories and experience these wonderful stories, characters, cultures that you are creating in your stories, and that's what it's all about. So as we turn the page here, we get to see some interesting dialogue between Gran and Ayame. Remember, Gran is the guide, Ayame is the protagonist, and we get to see what the difference of viewpoints are, right? So the way Gran's kind of saying like, your training is different, have you forgotten your father's teachings? And then Ayame says, well, there's no need for these type of training that I was put through. Tatsu doesn't need to go through that training. There's no need for it. And they start discussing that. And then eventually they come to the point where we have Ayame saying, well, father's training is of no use in the real world. The real world only cares about, and then we get this ... Now this is a great way to get the reader to turn the page. So because you've got like this ... it's like, well, what does the real world only care about? What does the real world... So you're giving it like an opening, like a question here, right? You're opening the question in the reader's mind. I've got to turn the page to find out. So that's very, very, very important to use that the page turn. So you'll see as we go through this kind of creator's edition, I've used the page turn a lot. Something I'm trying to master, something I'm trying to use a lot in, because I found that in a lot of stories, the page turn is what keeps you reading, right? You need to know the answer to that question or that sort of pause or something, and then you need to turn the page to continue reading. So that's a trick you can use. Well, it's not a trick, it's more part of storytelling, right? It's storytelling. Hey, you want to know the answer to this question, turn the page and continue reading. So that's something you can use in your stories as well. And then we turn the page and we see this here, bang, bang, open the door, Ayame, and then we see this dialogue. So you turn the page and you see this here, right? This big panel here, which kind of shows you why that particular dialogue in the previous panel was interrupted. So one of the things I wanted to do with my main character, Ayame here, was to have a catchphrase. Because when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, every character had a catchphrase. Every cartoon character, every something, they had a catchphrase. So when you heard it, you knew that it was that character. You built an association with that catchphrase, with that character. After you heard it so many times, that was what that character is known for. So that's why I wanted to create this catchphrase. So we have this Japanese word here, chikuzo here, which basically translates to something like oh damn or damn it or oh shit in this case. So that's where I went with this. So I've got the catchphrase there. So just think about creating a catchphrase for your character just to give that sort of connection with them. So let's say, for example, if you're out in the world and somebody says oh shit, and you've read this story here, Ayame, you're like oh shit, chikuzo, that means chikuzo, that means that's something Ayame says, right? So it's like a connection that basically lives outside of the story. So when someone says something like that, or you hear it offhanded, or you hear damn it, you're like oh damn it, and you're like it's a connection that you will have. So there are many characters that have connections, something like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like they say cowabunga, right? So if you hear cowabunga, or if you hear or see cowabunga, you know it's from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you know it's from that franchise, from those particular characters. That's very, very important. So we're trying to create connections here with the character. So something worth considering putting into your stories. So here we have the introduction of the Yakuza. We've got two characters here. We've got Jin here and we've got Dogai. Now, one of the things you can do with your characters when you introduce them is the clothing they wear really tells you a lot about that character. So you can see from Jin here, the clothing he's wearing, he's a bit more like upper class in terms of the Yakuza. And we have Dogai here on the right, who's just wearing your standard like clothing, so he's a bit more lower down in that social status. That's very, very important. It tells you a lot about characters' clothing, something to consider. The other thing I want to do as we turn the page is how they speak. So Jin speaks very differently to the way Dogai does. So Jin obviously speaks in English, he can speak English, and he speaks in a different kind of way in terms of his speech. So he's a bit more educated. The way he speaks is very, very important. It tells you a lot about that character as well. So something to consider as well. The other thing I wanted to do as well with Dogai is to have a character that actually just doesn't speak English, speaks in their native tongue. So Dogai speaks in Japanese. He doesn't speak in English. That tells you a lot about that character as well. So just wanted to get that contrast between the two characters. So they're not the same, they're different. We're having that uniqueness, very, very important. And then also here we learn as we go through the kind of paneling here that Jin is the message sender. He sends the message. Dogai does the dirty work, right? So for example, Jin will be the person who does the messaging, and then Dogai will be the one who takes action and does all the dirty work, so to speak. It does all the physical kind of dirty work, so to speak, to send that message physically. So that's something we can have with the contrast characters, something to consider when you're creating your stories. As we turn the page here, we see this panel here with Gran, who's protecting Ayame. And Gran is actually based on my grandmother from my father's side. And she was very tough. She went through a lot of life experience and she's got a lot of built up a lot of character. And she also had a cane like this in her later years as well. So there's something I wanted to put into this character was my grandmother from my father's side. I wanted to put some of her elements into Gran, that she's tough, right? That she's been through life, that she's seen a lot of things, that she's not afraid of things. And she's got that life experience. So here she is with her protective nature, trying to protect her granddaughter, which is Ayame. As any grandmother or parent or sibling would do, right? You're going to protect the ones you love, your family. It's just an innate part of being a human being. So that's something we can all relate to. So that's what we've got here with Gran. So as we move to this part of the story here, where obviously Gran is no match for Dogai, and we see her basically get thrown into the wall here. Ayame reacts, and then we see this build up here, right? We see this build up where her hand is like that and it's turning into a fist. So again, this is the page turn, right? Turn the page, see what happens. What's going to happen when we turn the page is we're asking the question here of the reader. Hey, is Ayame going to defeat Dogai? Is she going to lose? What's going to happen, right? What is going to happen? Let's turn the page and find out. So again, using that page turn again to keep the reader interested in the story. Hey, turn the page, find out what happens next. So we turn the page and we see that Ayame is not having a great time against Dogai. She's struggling to even land a punch. And then we see here the difference between Ayame and Tatsu, where Tatsu just comes flying through, right? And kicks Dogai. And that's one of the, again, a contrast between Ayame and Tatsu. Because Tatsu's a teenager, right? He's a teenager. I'm sure you all can remember when you were teenagers. You believe you could take on the world. You're egotistical. You're brash. You're unfiltered, right? So you don't worry about the consequences, right? That's what the whole point of being a teenager is. You're carefree, so to speak. So he goes and he attacks Dogai. Whereas Ayame, as you get older, you kind of lose that carefreeness. Your ego kind of goes down. The brashness, that adventure that you have goes down because you are more indoctrinated into the world and the social norms and the conventions. That's what happens as you get older. So it's all something we can relate with. So that's why we've got the two contrasting characters here with Ayame and Tatsu. So as we turn the page over, one of the things I like about this couple of pages is the lighting coming through. So we have this beautiful sunlight coming through with these shadows. Excellent contrast here. I really like that. Again, we have it here as well, the contrast as well within the lighting and the shadows here. Very, very important. Another one of the panels that I do like is this here, Gran, again showing her feistiness where she's giving the middle finger to Jin and Dogai as they leave the dojo. So again, we're learning more about this character here, Gran, that she's older, she doesn't care what people think, right? She's going to be unfiltered, so to speak. She knows who she is, she knows what she's all about, she's gone through that life experience. That's where we learn more about this character. So as we turn the page here, we see the aftermath of the confrontation with the Yakuza. We see the fallout, so to speak, where we can see Ayame discussing this with Tatsu, and then we have even Gran maybe thinking that everything's not going to work out the way it was supposed to work out. Maybe the Tiger Dragon will not be reborn, and she's doubting herself. And then we have Tatsu and Ayame having a discussion about that as well. So as we turn the page here, this panel here was something that I was trying to experiment with. As I was getting more confident, I'm reading more stories, I'm learning more about paneling from the different books that I'm reading from. I decided to go with this very heavy panel in terms of number of panels in there basically. So we have this one big panel here where Gran's on the phone, and all these inset panels are where all these things are happening at the same time. So we've got Tatsu running up there, we've got Ayame getting his lunch ready, and then she's throwing the box into his bag, and then off he goes, right? And this is all happening while this discussion is going on the phone with Gran. So that's something that I was trying to experiment more with, becoming more confident. So don't be afraid to experiment with paneling. As long as it's not distracting, as long as it works in the story, that's absolutely fine. Just experiment, right? That's the only way you're going to get better at things, is to experiment, try, and there you go. Don't be afraid to try new paneling, see if it works. If it doesn't, you can always edit it, remember. You can always come back and edit it. It's never set in stone. Things are never set in stone, right? You can always go back and change things. But as long as you've tried to do something, seeing if it works or not. If it does work, keep it. If it doesn't, you can always change it. So always try something with your paneling, see if it works. If it doesn't, change it. If it does, keep it. So as we turn the page here, we see a panel here with no words. Sometimes we don't need words or sound effects in a panel. Sometimes a expression of a character says it all it needs to say, right? We don't need to always add word balloons or sound effects into a particular panel. In this case, you can tell straight away because of the context of the story. Ayame's wrist hurts or hand hurts, right? Just by looking at this, you can tell. She's looking at her wrist, she's holding it. You know there's something wrong with that. We don't need any word balloons or anything else in there. We can tell straight away from the context of the story, from what we read so far, that there's a problem with her wrist. And then obviously as we go to the next panel here, you can see that's the problem, right? She's got a bruise on her wrist here. So something I wanted to do in my stories is to add some Easter eggs. Here we have the PlayStation 4 game Street Fighter and Tekken. just something I wanted to add in there. So when you're reading my stories, hopefully you're going to look for certain things, and what I want to do is call back to these things. So as we go through the story, we'll have a callback to these things inside the story, these Easter eggs. That's what I wanted to do, to keep the almost like the attention of the reader, almost like to be like, oh, this thing here, for example, is not here for fun, right? Like he's going to use this in the story somewhere, right? The writer's going to use this in the story somewhere. And that's what I wanted to do, was add these kind of like Easter eggs where we're going to use them later on in the story. That's what I wanted to do, keep the reader looking for this and be like, okay, he's showing us this. The writer is showing us this. Where are they going to use this? Let me see in the story where they're going to use this. So it's almost like you're playing a game with the reader. And then as we move on to this panel here, this is something you can use to extend your panel and also guide the reader. So here we've got like ring ring, which is the phone ringing, obviously on the ringtone. And then you've got Ayame saying, come on, Nico, ring ring, and then pick up. So it's a great way to almost expand your panel here and take the reader through the story there in that panel. So we're getting more out of that panel. So ring ring, come on Nico, ring ring again, pick up. And then finally to the last panel of chapter 1 here, we're leading the reader again with this boop sound here. So it's going to voicemail. Nico is unavailable, please leave a message after the tone. And then on the bottom right here, we see it's almost pointing to the corner of the page here, asking the reader to turn the page so they can continue reading the story. So again, that's the page turn here. Like I said, I was trying to use it a lot. The page turn is something that is used a lot in a lot of great comics and stories, is to keep you reading. So again, I'm almost leading the reader here to go turn the page. Let's go and continue reading the story and see what happens. Does Nico ring Ayame back? What happens in the next part of the story? Turn the page and find out. So that was chapter 1 of the creator's commentary there for Tiger Dragon the Rebirth. I hope you find it useful. If you're creating a visual narrative or a comic book, this is going to help you to think deeper so you can engage your reader more, which is very, very important when you're creating a comic book or a graphic novel. If you just found this story interesting, you're going through, you're like, hey, this is an interesting story. Why I want to learn more about this. Link in the description down below. It's going to take you to this page here. Sign up to my email list, and then you will get chapter 1 of Tiger Dragon the Rebirth sent to your inbox. And then you'll learn more about Tiger Dragon the Rebirth as well, the influences when I send more emails to you, what helped to create Tiger Dragon the Rebirth, what are my influences, what am I trying to create with the entertaining, empowering, and inspiring heroic stories that I'm trying to create. So that's what you're going to learn there. So looking forward for you to jump on that. And until the next video, always be learning.